Bueno, pues tenemos alguna dificultad para hablar, para escuchar a Marco Rubio. Mientras tanto, ya saben, foco puesto en las relaciones internacionales en Irán, a ver qué es lo que deparan esas conversaciones nucleares, pero vamos ya con esa plantilla, con los protagonistas en Wall Street. De momento vamos a tener una secuencia, sobre todo protagonismo en el sector tecnológico y en el sector farmacéutico. Vamos a mostrar esa plantilla, si la podemos mostrar a continuación, con lo que están haciendo, recordemos, en preapertura algunas compañías. Esta es la de Banco Santander, ya les hemos contado que Banco Santander, pues de momento está logrando contener la hemorragia. La compañía que va a adquirir por 10.300 millones de dólares Webster Bank, con un 65% en efectivo y 35% en acciones. El mercado que está evaluando, midiendo esos costes de integración, los riesgos que hay en un mercado tan competitivo como el americano, y de momento esas señales de sinergias reales. Ya ha dicho la entidad Ana Patricia Botín que para primeros de 2027 se verían ya esas sinergias de 800 millones de euros. Vamos con otros protagonistas. Siguiente diapositiva, protagonistas en Wall Street. Vamos a recordarles también que el foco está puesto en el sector tecnológico y en el sector farmacéutico, porque Supermicrocomputer está cayendo de forma muy estrepitosa, a pesar de que ha disparado, fíjense, sus ingresos un 143% en el cuarto trimestre. Espera ingresos anuales de al menos 40.000 millones de dólares. También veremos cómo el mercado evalúa las cuentas de AMD, Advanced Micro Device. Ha ganado 1.500 millones de dólares en el cuarto trimestre y un beneficio anual de 6.800 millones. Ya decimos que las dos compañías están cayendo de forma muy importante en bolsa. Y premio para Eli Lilly, que en la teoría de los vasos comunicantes sube Eli Lilly y baja Novo Nordisk. Eli Lilly que ha registrado un 43% más de aumento de ingresos en el cuarto trimestre. Hablamos de 19.300 millones de dólares gracias a sus fármacos adelgazantes. También pendientes de las cuentas de Uber, se desploman las ganancias un 96%, y Alphabet, ya saben que al cierre del mercado esperamos las cuentas de este gigante, para el cual se esperan ingresos récord de más de 111.000 millones de dólares, lo que supone un 15% más si lo comparamos con los ingresos de 2014. A la espera de poder despejar esas dudas sobre la inteligencia artificial, sobre Anthropic, con esa herramienta que parece que está castigando al mercado laboral estadounidense, a las firmas ligadas al software y a todo ello, vamos a recordarles también más focos puestos en la política, en J.D. Vance, el vicepresidente estadounidense, que está también dejando importantes mensajes.
To let you know that we're honored by your presence and certainly grateful for you coming to Washington for this very important conversation. I know there are a lot of very important discussions to be had over the rest of the day, and so I want to be relatively brief. First, let me say thanks to our incredible Secretary of State for putting this group together. Marco's doing an incredible job. And when he asked me to come and speak today, I said, man, this is your building. Why don't you come and give a speech? And he said, well, because I've got 5 jobs and you've only got 1. And so I figured I might as well do Marco a solid, since he's also the archivist and the official White House florist and has a number of other jobs in addition to Secretary of State. So I'd kick us off, and then he's going to take the reins from here. But let me just say a few things about what we're doing and why this matters. So I remember after our very wildly successful military operation in Venezuela, the President of the United States was talking with me and Marco and some of the other senior members of the cabinet. And he was talking just about how important it was that we ensured that the global economy had access to oil and gas many years in the future. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why we're interested in Venezuela, is because it has such a critical importance in this all-important resource called oil. And as much as we talk about the modern economy, the digital economy, the high-tech economy, the president said something that was very, very important, and I think should inform a lot of how we think about future growth, which is that as much as data centers and technology and all of these incredible things that we're all working on matter, fundamentally, you still have an economy that runs on real things. And there is no realer thing than oil. And I would add to that, there's no realer thing than critical minerals. And I think a lot of us have learned the hard way, in some ways, over the last year, how much our economies depend on these critical minerals. So every man and woman, I believe, in this room understands what we're confronting together today. And I say together, and that is very much something that is at the heart of Secretary Rubio's initiative. And as he said, at the heart of what we're trying to do all across the administration is recognize that this is something where our alliances and our friends really help one another. We're all on the same team. We're all rowing in the same direction. I believe that in this room, we have close to 2/3 of the world's GDP. And so we have the capacity to make ourselves more independent, more self-reliant, and that's what we should be doing. Now, we know that today, the international market is failing. It's failing to create domestic markets or dignified jobs for our labor forces, and it's failing to keep our nation safe. Supply chains remain brittle and exceptionally concentrated. Asset and commodity prices are persistently depressed, driven downward by forces beyond any individual country's control. Now, how many times cumulatively have one of us or many of us in this room heard some variation of the story that I'm about to tell? A lithium mine, a gallium recovery center, you name it, is announced, sometimes with years in planning and financing nearly in place. Then overnight, foreign supply floods the market, the prices collapse, and investors pull out. The project stalls, and eventually the project dies on the vine. We've all seen it firsthand in all of our countries. And the result is a global market where consistent investment is nearly impossible, and it will stay that way so long as prices are erratic and unpredictable. And that's one of the things that we want to work on with this initiative. Let's make the prices more predictable and less erratic so that we can support the domestic supply chains and the investment that makes those supply chains possible. Now, across Europe, North America, there are dozens of mining and processing initiatives that have been suspended or completely abandoned because sustained price weakness makes financing impossible. Time after time, advanced economies with deep capital markets are finding that projects cannot clear costs. The same story plays out elsewhere around the world. In resource-rich developing economies, only a tiny fraction of global mining investment, including from nations, many of them in this room, is reaching the point of actual projects. We plan, we think about it, we even invest a little bit of money, we do the regulatory work, but so many of them die on the vine. Now, everyone knows that these deposits exist. We've mapped a whole lot of them, and we know they're ready to be mined and processed. But capital can't reach them so long as investors lack confidence that those markets are going to remain stable for long enough to justify the long-term commitment. That is the problem that we confront. And even here in the United States, even with all the incredible things that President Trump and the entire administration has done to eliminate permits, to open up the regulatory environment, we have private financing that we've secured, but even in some cases, even in the United States, some of these projects are struggling to attract investors. We see telltale signs of a market distorted beyond recognition, one that punishes strategic investment, one that punishes diversification, and one that punishes long-term planning. This is crazy. We should have the kind of global markets, the kind of domestic markets that reward long-term planning, that reward strategic thinking, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. I think every single one of us represented in this room has become dependent on arrangements we did not choose, and right now, arrangements that we cannot control. We all face the same vulnerability: access to the things that protect our people and sustain our way of life. Everything from missile defense systems to energy infrastructure, to advanced manufacturing, to emerging technologies. The fundamental supply chains that support these industries sometimes can vanish in the blink of an eye without any control or influence from any of the countries in this room. And we in the Trump administration believe it is the business of the government, of the people's government elected just over a year ago, to confront such problems, and we want to confront them together. And I think that you're all here, at least I hope you're all here, because you all feel the exact same way. Now, our administration came into office last January, barely a year ago, with a clear mandate to reindustrialize the United States of America and return American workers to the center of our economic policy. And that is what we are doing. And I want to tell you just a little story about one of the very first meetings I had with our Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of the Treasury, two great people, two great business leaders. And I remember saying, look, we have our views of the Biden administration. We're not particularly fans, as you may have guessed. But setting that to the side, surely the Biden administration put together a list of the critical industries, the critical technologies, the critical manufacturing facilities that are supported by these rare earth minerals, these critical minerals. We may think it's bad work. We may think the people who put it together weren't particularly wise, but surely that gives us some foundation to build on. And I was shocked when our Secretary of the Commerce and Secretary of the Treasury came back to me and said, actually, we have never done this. For the last 4 years, the Biden administration never sat down and tried to understand what are the critical deficiencies in world supply chains. That's crazy. It's insane that we ever got to this point. But in just 1 year, the President of the United States has struck dozens of deals to fix that problem. Domestic and foreign producers are both included in this, and we're trying to ensure durable end-to-end supply chains for our country, but also for many of our friends. We've mobilized public financing tools at an unprecedented scale, providing up to $100 billion in lending authority for critical minerals to the Office of Strategic Capital. Marco's now a venture capitalist too. He's got many jobs. We've overturned old orthodoxies and taken direct stakes in high-value mining and processing companies. The United States had not built a primary smelter in this country since 1980, before I was born, 4 years before I was born. In the last month alone, we have announced two, one of which is already fully funded. And on Monday, the Trump administration announced Project Vault, America's first ever domestic critical minerals stockpile. With these moves, we intend to build an ironclad network of new industrial supply chains to span the entire nation. We're going to create good paying jobs, skilled jobs for the American labor force, and those people, those great workers, are going to be securing a new era of prosperity for American families, and I believe for many people all over the world. But we seek to make sure our friends and our allies are part of this and that you all are covered as well. Our goal here, and the reason why we're doing this conference, is to align trade policy, development finance, and diplomatic engagement towards a shared strategic objective. And that objective is very simple: diversifying global supply in the critical minerals market while strengthening the partner countries who help all of us in this shared effort. Over the past year, our administration has signed agreements. We have launched many joint initiatives, and we have committed extensive resources with many of you in this room, with many governments, and our work extends across disparate regions and all stages of the value chain. We've convened this ministerial in an effort to accelerate that shared work. So this morning, the Trump administration is proposing a concrete mechanism to return the global critical minerals market to a healthier, more competitive state. A preferential trade zone for critical minerals protected from external disruptions through enforceable price floors. We will establish reference prices for critical minerals at each stage of production, pricing that reflects real-world fair market value. And for members of the preferential zone, these reference prices will operate as a floor, maintained through adjustable tariffs to uphold pricing integrity. We want to eliminate that problem of people flooding into our markets with cheap critical minerals to undercut our domestic manufacturers, because we know, of course, that as soon as they've undercut our domestic makers, the domestic markers, they leave the market, and the people who undercut them then jack up the price to a completely unfair level. We're going to fix that problem. Together, we want members to form a trading bloc among allies and partners, one that guarantees American access to American industrial might while also expanding production across the entire zone. The benefits will be immediate and durable. Regardless of how much material flows into the global market, prices within the preferential trade zone will remain consistent. Over time, our goal within that zone is to create diverse centers of production, stable investment conditions, and supply chains that are immune to the kind of external disruptions that we've already talked about. For those of you who join, we offer you a necessary foundation for private financing and secure access to the critical mineral supplies your nation would require in an emergency or some other contingency. By regulating imports to preserve free and fair competition within the preferential trading zone, we will elevate our nation's miners and refiners, our investors and our producers alike. We are all on the same team, and we need to create the economic incentives that reward people for investing and building in our countries. Membership will be vital for developing economies seeking to expand mining capacity. And it'll be just as important for the advanced economies that rely on these materials to sustain their advanced industries, to sustain their growth and security. And I want to be clear with every person in this room. While we believe America's market is large enough to create its own critical minerals trading zone, this entire effort will be stronger and far more competitive if we build it together. So I'm pleased that so many of you here today have already signed on to this plan. Some of you have not. And for those not yet there, we hope that today's discussions will encourage you to finalize those agreements as quickly as possible. Now, I know you're going to be hearing from a lot of others in our administration, including our great Secretary of Rubio, I think really the greatest Secretary of State the United States has ever had, and other senior administrators in our team. And I know that Ambassador Greer, our great trade representative, will present further specifics about what he'll be negotiating, what we're calling the Agreement on Trade and Critical Minerals. Knowing Jameson, I know it will be a very productive session, and I know it will be a very detailed session. As all of you who know Jameson well, he is a guy who gets into the details because he knows that that's where the substance of an agreement can really be made. So I want to close, but before I do, let me just reiterate. We here, I think all of us are friends. We've all spent many years describing this problem. Before I was ever in politics, I would hear politicians and global leaders talk about this problem. For too many of those years, we talked about it, but we refused to actually solve it. The framework before us is a change. It is a practical and enforceable approach to solving the problem, not just complaining about it. Many of you have helped us design it, and we're of course constructing it together in real time. So to those of you still on the fence, I say, let's move together. Before you is a chance to lead, to secure your nation's ability to build, to produce, to defend itself. What is before all of us is an opportunity at self-reliance, that we never have to rely on anybody else except for each other for the critical minerals necessary to sustain our industries and to sustain growth. So I propose that we come together and we shape a market worthy of the great men and women of our countries who depend on that market. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm honored by your presence. The president sends his very best regards, and I look forward to everything that we're going to accomplish together. God bless you all and have fun today.
Las palabras de J.D. Vance, el vicepresidente estadounidense, hablando de esa cuestión, de esa reserva estratégica, esa cumbre global de minerales críticos en Washington, donde se pretende contener la influencia de China en un mercado clave para la defensa y para el comercio. Decía J.D. Vance que lograrán diversificar el mercado de los minerales críticos, asegurando que es un mercado tan grande el americano que puede echar a andar por sí solo, aunque lo cierto es que no ha habido grandes menciones a la posición de predominancia de China, que engloba hasta el 90% de las tierras raras, y Donald Trump, que en definitiva iniciaba ese proceso destinado a evitar que Pekín controle este tipo de recursos esenciales para la economía mundial y sigue cerrando acuerdos con otros proveedores como Australia. JD Vance, que asegura que será capital ese apuntalamiento de los minerales críticos, de las tierras raras, asegurando que construirán una red inquebrantable de nuevas cadenas de suministro y que diversificarán su oferta global. Bueno, pues estamos ya a punto de llegar a las 3:30 de la tarde, apenas unos segundos. Estamos a punto de dar comienzo a la sesión en Wall Street. De momento los futuros con bastante indefinición. De nuevo los resultados van a dictar sentencia. Foco puesto, lógicamente, en las compañías tecnológicas. Mientras tanto, vamos a recordar también lo que está haciendo las bolsas europeas. De momento se mantiene el tono positivo, avances para el IBEX 35 del 0,6%, 18.225 puntos, números verdes también para el FTSE 100 londinense, que está liderando esas ganancias cercanas al 1%, y en definitiva, dentro de la media europea, hoy vemos cómo los movimientos más destacados son para Siemens, que está cayendo un 7%, en tanto que Deutsche Telekom la mejor. Citi es la encargada de dar el toque de campana que da comienzo la sesión en Wall Street. Vamos allá. Bueno, pues consigno mixto Wall Street. De momento, sin grandes sorpresas, con escasos movimientos. Parece que el mercado está en actitud de espera antes de los resultados de Alphabet. Y en definitiva, pues vemos que está completamente plano. El SP500, vamos a verlo un poco más arriba, compañeros. En efecto, el SP500 que está prácticamente plano. El Dow Jones subiendo un 0,4%. Y el Nasdaq, que aquí está la duda, las caídas que son del 0,4%. Es una jornada en la que el protagonismo está sobre los resultados empresariales. Ha habido muchas compañías que han prestado cuentas, Uber, Eli Lilly, también Fox News, la compañía de medios, además de, en este caso, el sector tecnológico. Vamos a ver esas cotizaciones. Comenzamos por el sector farmacéutico con Eli Lilly, que la compañía Zepbound, ya saben, este fármaco adelgazante, pues parece que está teniendo mucha mejor acogida en el mercado que otros fármacos como los de Novo Nordisk. Ayer Novo Nordisk, que se hundía un 16%, vamos a ver si podemos poner ese faldón, en efecto, subiendo un 7,5%, disparándose el Lilly, y Novo Nordisk que continúa con su viacrucis. Novo Nordisk que está cayendo nuevamente, en este caso un 4,3%, hablamos de la bolsa americana. Si hablamos de la bolsa europea, está cayendo pues a doble dígito. Ya saben que ayer se desplomaba un 16% ante esas perspectivas más débiles para 2026 y, en definitiva, los ingresos que no han sido todo lo bueno que el mercado juzga que eran suficientes. Novo Nordisk que se desploma, pero en este caso tenemos sobre la mesa las cuentas de, recordemos, de Eli Lilly, que se está disparando más de un 7% ante ese buen comportamiento de su fármaco Zepbound, que parece que se impone al Ozempic de Novo Nordisk. El sector farmacéutico que está marcando la pauta en la jornada de hoy con muchas dudas. Hubo un momento en el que había muchas dudas por, ya saben, las compañías que hacían fármacos genéricos, la marca blanca famosa. Finalmente, bueno, pues aquí están los fundamentales del mercado, las cuentas de, en este caso, de Eli Lilly disparándose un 7%, el protagonista indiscutido de la sesión, y hundiendo aún más a Novo Nordisk por esa teoría de los vasos comunicantes, con esas caídas que veíamos en el día de ayer del 16%. Hablamos del sector tecnológico, hablemos ya pues en este caso de los descensos que están viendo otras compañías como AMD, Advanced Micro Device. Ayer presentaba unos resultados que pues a la vista está que no están gustando demasiado al mercado. Fíjense la caída, hundiéndose AMD un 12,6%. Esto todavía arroja muchas más dudas sobre la inteligencia artificial, sobre la capacidad de producción de chips, la demanda global y, sobre todo, las inversiones en centros de datos. Bueno, pues AMD que se está hundiendo un 12%. Ya saben que Palantir Technologies, fíjense, también recortes del 3%, del 4,2%. Y otra de las compañías que ha presentado resultados, además de Advanced Micro Device, Supermicrocomputer. Ese, recordemos, compañía que también está dejando una secuencia. Bueno, pues aquí el premio para esta compañía, Supermicrocomputer, sube un 11,5%. Y de nuevo aquí la teoría de los vasos comunicantes, unas cuentas que parece que han gustado bastante al mercado, sobre todo porque ha elevado su previsión de ingresos para 2026 y eso el mercado lo está premiando, como ya ocurriera la pasada semana con el palo para Microsoft, en este caso la zanahoria para Meta, y aquí estamos viendo algo parecido en compañías en otro orden de capitalización, pero bueno, cara para Supermicrocomputer, cruz para AMD y sobre todo el desplome que están viviendo el sector farmacéutico. Así despierta este mercado con un Wall Street que parece que tiene sobre sí ese plebiscito, esas cuentas capitales de Alphabet. Y ahora sí, vamos a escuchar desde el vicepresidente J.D. Vance al secretario de Estado Marco Rubio en esa cumbre sobre minerales críticos en Washington.
Vice President, for coming this morning. I thought it was important you hear from him because it's a priority for this administration at the highest order, as it is, I know, a priority for many of our partners. And our hope is to use both this forum and our position here today to serve as a convener on what really is an international problem, an international situation or an international issue that needs multilateral international solutions. I don't need to explain to anybody here that critical minerals are vital to the devices that we use every single day. They power our infrastructure, our industry, and our national defense, which is something that's not talked about enough, but it's a key part of that. And so our goal is to have a global market that's secure, a global supply that's enduring and is available to everyone, every nation at an affordable price. That's a top priority for this administration. I want to talk briefly about our politics here domestically, or our policies here domestically, primarily to serve as an example or a reminder of what a priority we give this topic. President Trump, from day one in office, has made clear that economic security is national security. So we, for example, following in March, he issued an executive order to accelerate permitting reform, to increase domestic mining, and to build reliable supply chains, both at home and abroad. And we feel like all of you, our friends and our partners, stand to benefit from the secure supply chains that we want to be a big part of building. In October alone, the United States secured over $10 billion in critical mineral agreements across 5 countries. Our friends and partners stand to, in December, for example, we convened stakeholders from around the world at the Pax Silica Summit. And thank you, Jacob, for doing that. It's launching a partnership dedicated to building a resilient silicone supply chain capable of powering a new era of global prosperity. Pax Silica and artificial intelligence may be the future. Still, the future will never come to pass. None of these things are going to be possible unless we rebuild the factories and reopen the mines upon which these technologies depend. And I want to use a case in point from our own history to highlight this. The United States used to produce its own critical minerals and derivative products like rare earth magnets. Back in 1949, miners in Mountain Pass, California, discovered one of the world's richest mineral deposits. By 1952, the United States, we were mining rare earths there, and that discovery sparked a revolution. American scientists and engineers, alongside innovators from many of the countries that are here today, rushed to discover new applications for these minerals. And with these new technologies, ushered in the jet age. We ushered in the space age. We ushered in the computer age. And then we became blinded by the potential of the technologies those metals enabled, but we neglected their importance. Mining is less glamorous than building computers. It's less glamorous than building cars or airplanes. But building computers and cars and airplanes is less glamorous than designing them. As we embraced what was new and glamorous, we outsourced what seemed old and unfashionable. We allowed, for example, Mountain Pass, and with it, most of America's critical mineral industry to wither and to die so that we could focus on manufacturing. Then we outsourced the manufacturing. And I know this is a story I'm telling, but it's a story many of the advanced economies represented here today understand well. We outsourced the manufacturing so we could focus on designing these goods. And then one day we woke up and we realized we had outsourced our economic security and our very future. We were at the mercy of whoever controlled supply chains for these minerals. So my hope is that we are gathered here today as the first but important step to rectifying this mistake, to bring together our collective talent for innovation where our advantage over rivals has only grown, and to apply it to bringing back manufacturing and reopening mines here in the United States, but also in all the partner nations represented here today. I think it's interesting that about 50 years ago, actually in this very room, ministers from around the world joined then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger for the Washington Energy Conference. That meeting took place during a moment where global energy supplies were concentrated, where markets were distorted, and access to a single critical resource, at that time, of course, being oil, had become a tool of political pressure. That is the world 50 years ago. That meeting led directly to the creation of the International Energy Agency to coordinate among like-minded partners and secure access to energy commodities. And so today, we return 50 years later in the hopes of advancing a bilateral critical minerals framework agreement to the same end on that front. These frameworks are designed to create alternative sources of supply and to protect every single stage of production, from mining to refining and processing to manufacturing. All of these things, protecting them from non-market disruption. They will provide platforms for coordinating policies that ensure all of our citizens can enjoy abundant and affordable access to these critical minerals. And so we stand ready and intend to work with each country here today to find a specialized role that you can play. If you don't have minerals, you can help refine them. And if the countries gathered here include the largest consumers of critical mineral products, who together have the buying power, collectively, have the buying power to build a more resilient and diverse global market. Everyone here has a role to play, and that's why we're so grateful for you coming and being a part of this gathering that I hope will lead to not just more gatherings, but action. The United States stands ready alongside each of you as we enter this new age of shared prosperity and security. And I want to end by saying that while we intend to play a key role and an important role and to use the size and influence of our markets to drive this, this is an international, multilateral effort, and it only works. You can only have diversity and choice in these markets if it is broadly adopted across multiple countries. So this initiative here today may be one that started with us, but this is not solely an American initiative. This must be an international, global initiative with like-minded countries who all have one thing in common. We want to see a diverse supply of critical minerals and a secure and resilient supply chains across the world so all of our economies can prosper without ever having these things be susceptible, at worst case scenario, being used as leverage against us, or any other disruption that could come to the market that would undermine our collective economic security. So thank you all for being a part of this today. We appreciate it very much. Let me now turn as we'll begin our program here. Minister Hori, I think you're going to start off. So thank you very much for being here today. Thank you all for being a part of this today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, I am Yuval Hori, State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan. It is my great honor to address you on behalf of the government of Japan regarding one of the most pressing and crucial issues we collectively face today, critical mineral supply chains. May I begin with...
Bueno, pues con esta cumbre sobre materiales críticos, minerales críticos, a tierras raras en Washington, seguimos muy pendientes y también contándoles que continúan las dudas sobre la inteligencia artificial con compañías que están hundiéndose como AMD, con las excepciones de Supermicrocomputer y en definitiva las dudas que hay con esta herramienta de inteligencia artificial que lanzaba Anthropic y que ha dejado muchas dudas en el mercado, esta herramienta de automatización que ayer provocaba una oleada de ventas de 285.000 millones en acciones de software, servicios financieros, gestión de activos en Estados Unidos. También, como saben, hay un asistente de inteligencia artificial que ha ganado mucha notoriedad por pues hacernos tareas como cuadrarnos nuestro calendario, leer nuestro correo electrónico, se llama Moltbot y en definitiva pues ha habido fallos de seguridad que han expuesto datos sensibles a terceros. Por las dudas sobre la inteligencia artificial, si es peor el remedio que la enfermedad y el impacto que tiene sobre el mercado laboral y la bolsa, contamos con expertos para hacer análisis de toda la situación. Saludamos a Esteban Almiral, profesor de ESADE en Innovación, IA y Smart Cities. ¿Qué tal, Esteban? Buenas tardes.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Bueno, ¿hasta qué punto esa venta masiva en Wall Street refleja un riesgo real? No sé si es un ajuste especulativo, si realmente... no sé, ¿cuáles son los sectores que están más expuestos a la inteligencia artificial? ¿Por qué caían tanto ayer software, servicios financieros?
Bueno, a ver, yo no creo que responda a un riesgo real, lo que sí que hay es ajustes y que estaremos ante un mercado muy volátil y seguro, ¿no? Los temas de Anthropic, durante este mes vamos a ver una avalancha de nuevos modelos que va a empezar con DeepSeek 4 y después veremos otro de Anthropic, etcétera, etcétera, que lo están haciendo cada vez mejor, ¿no? Los nuevos modelos de Anthropic permiten realizar software de una forma mucho más económica, más rápida, más segura, y esto sacude todos los mercados. Por dos razones, ¿no? Primero, porque el software se convierte en algo mucho más barato y por lo tanto vas a hacer más. Y por un lado necesitas menos gente, pero por otro lado vas a necesitar más gente porque va a haber más software, ¿no? Este es un campo, ¿no? Y por otro lado, porque hay todo un trasvase, es decir, cosas que antes necesitabas que hiciese una empresa de software, lo van a hacer los usuarios. Por lo tanto, hay un trasvase en todo esto, lo que crea una conmoción importante, ¿no? Y ahí vamos a ver movimientos importantes. Esto es lo que está sucediendo.
Y bueno, también otra de las noticias en torno al sector, hay una herramienta asistente, es Moldbox, que bueno, pues ha tenido algunos fallos de seguridad que han advertido, pues han expuesto de forma temporal las credenciales de acceso y toques de programación sin protección para muchas personas. Hablamos de un mecanismo que se instala en equipos locales, en WhatsApp, en Telegram, en Slack, para ejecutar acciones automatizadas. No sé si, Esteban, deberíamos darle las claves a una inteligencia artificial. Hay muchos expertos preocupados por este asunto.
Bueno, el caso de Moldbox, que antes se llamaba pues, Cloudbot, etcétera, es un caso especial. Es más un divertimento, es un producto que tiene una versión open source, open cloud, que se instala en tu propio ordenador. Y es un poco la visión de cuál puede ser el futuro. Alguien que esté a nuestro lado y que nos resuma lo que tenemos en el calendario, haga cosas por nosotros, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Pero se trata de una implementación muy inicial, es decir, no le deis muchas claves ni hagáis muchas cosas porque tendréis un disgusto. Esto no es un producto ni de Anthropic, ni de OpenAI, etcétera, etcétera. Son productos mucho más iniciales que tienen su gran interés en cuanto a qué es lo que vamos a hacer en un futuro cercano y con una forma mucho más robusta que estos productos, ¿no? Pero más allá de esto tampoco hay mucho más.
Bueno, y volviendo al tema de Anthropic, ¿qué diferencia esta nueva herramienta de automatización frente a otras soluciones ya existentes en el mercado? ¿Por qué hay tanto miedo, tanto nerviosismo a esta tecnología?
Bueno, la esencia de lo que se está haciendo ahora con generativa, las soluciones que había en el mercado es galáctica, son dos mundos diferentes, ¿no? Estas aplicaciones son capaces de hacer refactoring de una base de código muy importante, de decenas de miles de líneas de código, son capaces de trasladar de un lenguaje a otro de una forma bastante buena y yo creo que el mercado anticipa no solo lo que estamos viendo, no solo el Anthropic Code, OpenAI también tiene su versión, acaba de sacar una app con códex, es más o menos equivalente, sino lo que vamos a ver en muy poco tiempo, en un mes aproximadamente, que son nuevas versiones muy mejoradas de estos productos, ¿no? Cosas que antes eran imposibles. Si entrabas en un banco y veías miles y miles de líneas de código que todo el mundo quería cambiar y le cerrabas la puerta inmediatamente porque era imposible cambiarlas, era imposible de abordar, ¿no? Ahora son posibles. Estamos realmente ante un mundo nuevo.
Esteban Almiraez, profesor de SADE en Innovación, IA y Smart Cities, gracias por aportarnos luz con toda esta cuestión. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Bueno, pues sepan que hay noticias de última hora, en este caso relacionadas con Elon Musk y en este caso con Pedro Sánchez, porque Bruselas parece que está plantando al presidente del gobierno con esa polémica ley para, en este caso, impedir o prohibir a los jóvenes, a los menores de 16 años acceder a redes sociales. Ahí va Bruselas, que rechaza que Sánchez haga responsables a Elon Musk o a Mark Zuckerberg del contenido en redes sociales. Dicen desde Bruselas que la ley de la Unión Europea se centra en las plataformas. Desde la Comisión advierten al Gobierno de que no puede imponer obligaciones adicionales a las compañías y remarcan que el Gobierno puede decidir cuál es el límite de edad de acceso. De momento le marca las líneas, le para los pies. Pedro Sánchez, que ayer anunció hasta 5 medidas. Una de ellas es la prohibición de acceso a los menores de 16 años a redes sociales. Otra de ellas era la tipificación de delito para la alteración de algoritmos y también la persecución para las compañías haciéndolas responsables de los contenidos en redes sociales. De momento, Bruselas, que frena a Sánchez, dice que Elon Musk y Mark Zuckerberg no son responsables de lo que se vierta en los contenidos en las redes. Bueno, y ahora es turno para seguir hablando del universo de los mercados, el mercado cripto, hacer tiempo para balance y con la industria de gestión de activos y con plataformas como eToro. Saludamos a Leila Conner, analista global de mercados de eToro. Hi, Leila. Good morning, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Well,
Thank you.
in the arrival of Kevin Wars, the steps, marks the steps to a war fed. What is the greatest risks of market error that is undervaluing the average investors today?
Sure. I think one of the mistakes that the market is doing right now is seeing him as a hawk. We don't want to classify him as a hawk or as a dove, but what we have to say is that, look, he is probably going to pursue a smaller balance sheet and less forward guidance coming from the Fed. And I think that the market is still very much anchored towards a post-GFC reflex, where if they see rate cuts, then it means that assets are broadly going to reflate. What we're saying is that, you know, the error in that is don't assume that what we have seen before is going to continue. A smaller balance sheet means more dispersion between stocks. Those stocks that are, you know, the valuation are driven or the fundamentals are going to basically drive where the market is going to end up in terms of valuing these stocks, right? So I think there will be more dispersion. I think volatility might increase. I think there will be less forward guidance coming from Kevin Warsh, and therefore that's something that the market is underpricing right now, in my opinion.
After a violent correction in gold and silver, how is a healthy positioning cleaning distinct guys from early signs of structural change in the raw material cycle?
Sure. I think, you know, obviously we have seen rapid and emotional price declines, but those followed really parabolic increases in both gold and silver. What we're saying is that, you know, as prices are correcting towards long-term averages, that is a support for this asset class rather than, you know, something that we need to be worried about. What we're saying is that, you know, the structural demand is still there, coming from, again, central banks, and sovereign demand is very strong. We have new central banks divesting away from long-term treasuries towards gold primarily, I would say, or broader commodities. And therefore what we're saying is that the structural story is still there. The price is supported by this institutional demand, and therefore what we're saying, because of, again, forced selling via ETFs, via futures, via options, or market sentiment regarding an increase in the pace of the US dollar, really doesn't change the structural story here for gold. Now for silver, it's different because obviously it lacks that central bank backstop.
¿Has notado que tu forma de morder ha cambiado antes y después de la ortodoncia?
Yo antes tenía la mordida para adelante y ahora como que mastico bien.
La vuelta al cole más fácil con Betalent.
To detect bubbles before they explode?
Sure. Look, they burst because the capital intensity still rises faster than returns. Marginal